This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
The world, it's loud, messy, and half the time completely unhinged.
I'm Caleb Bond. I'm not here to be polite or play nice, but I will talk about the things others are tiptoeing around. You just need to keep up if you can, because the week's biggest stories don't wait, and neither do my opinions. I break it down, call it out, and fire back, because sugarcoating is for cupcakes.
The Bond Report starts 5 p.m. Friday, January 23.
I mean, awesome. I mean, I can't wait. Why doesn't he want to be polite? Why does he have to be rude?
Oh, well, Tom, I had a terrible thought watching that. I was thinking I kind of looked the part of a Caleb Bond. You know, like the Caleb Bond, JD Vance, Will Menaker look. Yes. I could sort of pull it off. And so maybe I should quit the pod and like take a heel turn. And imagine if someone who used to run a Greens pod went like nuts. I could rake it in.
I didn't leave the left left me.
You're leaving me right now.
And the fuck up cupcakes.
If you want the doll for life, free marijuana, vote Greens.
There are a bunch of ratbags and a bunch of idiots, and I got no time.
Bunch of idiots.
The Greens get way too good a run in the Australian media, way too free a run.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger.
Hello everyone, it is Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. Strap in, my opinions don't wait. We're just like Caleb Bond. This is not an official Greens Party podcast. It is produced by Michael the Griffin. Hello Griff.
Hi, good to see you.
And you. I'm Tom Ballard, of course, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people. Hope you're doing good. Lots going on. Of course, first of all, we're thinking of in solidarity to all the people affected by fires and floods that are hitting the country, particularly in Victoria. I think, yes, Victoria now experiencing flooding as well as fires, which is just really, really great to see. And, of course, Iran is kicking off as well. Very hard to keep across that conversation, but solidarity with people protesting for their rights. Pretty remarkable that Anthony Albanese was out there saying the Iranian regime needs to respect people's right to protest, coming to you from a country in which it is currently illegal to protest. In Australia.
Obviously the hypocrisy is noted and completely irrelevant to any discussion. But look, they're hypocrites. They're hypocrites, Tom. Did you notice that? They're hypocrites.
I know, but it feels good to point it out, but there you go. Also, obviously, there's a big story about these sort of hate speech and gun laws. That's an evolving story. We're going to wait and see what happens there. We'll talk about that on next week's show once Parliament actually comes back.
I saw a very an email from Deep Cut that made me feel anxious. It was like Greens staring down the gun of being evil. And it was like, oh, I'd hate to run a Greens podcast. I don't know.
Well, yes, I think a lot of groups, including the Socialist Party, various civil rights groups are calling on the Greens to not support those laws because they are, trampling on civil liberties left, right and centre. Now the coalition, who of course lobbied for Parliament to come back so they could pass exactly these laws, are now saying, actually, maybe we shouldn't pass these laws. It's another schmozzle.
Which it did make me laugh because it was like Albo is the master politician. He showed the libs by introducing terrible policy. That'll show them.
And then maybe can't even pass that. So I guess we'll wait and see.
The federal government is on track for a major setback as it pushes ahead with a plan to reform hate speech and gun laws. The Greens have now joined the coalition in rejecting the proposal, saying they can't support the bill in its current form.
Let's take a listen to what Senator David Shoebridge had to say earlier.
When the government brings legislation into the parliament that protects only one religion, that is designed to put critics in jail, and that has not been consulted with the broader community, there's only one word to describe that, and that is divisive. The Greens will not be supporting that divisive legislation. Legislation that gives the Home Affairs Minister broad powers to deport people with almost no checks and balances, or permits the Home Affairs Minister to literally criminalise organisations without even having to give natural justice. How did the Labor Party think that the Parliament would support that in some kind of sense of consensus.
This week's Emerald is currently the sole member of Parliament for the South Australian Greens. Robert Sims is going to be joining us for a chat about the state election, which is coming up on March 21st. We're talking all things South Australian politics, including, of course, the absolute implosion of Adelaide Writers Week and the fallout thereof.
And
Juicy.
they apologised, and it was all for nothing. It was all for nothing.
Well, it was all for decency and good social cohesion, Michael. Don't you think everyone's so much more cohesive now?
Oh, dear me.
Hey, please give us money if you can. If you support us via Patreon, patreon.com/seriousdangerau, you get to hear from the lovely Emerald Moon. Bonus extra hot content every fortnight for as little as $3 a month. The latest episode is our Inside the Green series, looking at chapter 11 of that book, the Gonski blow-up, the dual citizenship hoo-ha, Dina Talley's leadership. If you're not in a position to chip in, or if you already do, we'd also really appreciate it if you spread the word by sharing the show with your friends and loved ones and enemies. And once again, very self-indulgent plug for my show, Be Funny Challenge Impossible, coming to Perth from the 23rd of January. Is it the 23rd? No, I think it's the 21st. Anyway, Wednesday. I'm there
It's
next
the
week.
21st. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, you were
No,
checking
I'm
that.
just pretending to know. I wouldn't have a clue. Sorry.
Super fan Michael Griffin knows my schedule. Anyway, I'm at the Oasis Comedy Club. If you're in Perth, would love to see you come along to that. You've seen me working up material for the show and you found it mildly amusing. Is that right, Michael?
Everyone should go and bring all of their friends and family.
Yay. I've got a play coming up of Midsummer as well. Come along to that. And at Media, Jan Fran and Antoinette Lattouf, they're doing live shows across the country. I'm going to be the one in Canberra on Wednesday, February the 4th, alongside Fatima Payman. That's going to be a really fun show. I'm pretty sure they're filling up a lot. But if you haven't bought tickets to that already and you're in Canberra, that's going to be a fun night out.
Fatima Payman, interesting. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to chat to her about all things, even if she gave a thumbs down to the Greens at one point, I believe.
Yeah, well.
What do you got here? You want to talk about a rent certificate? What's this?
Oh, yeah. So I just quickly. So I recently had to re-engage with Centrelink, which is always fun. But I got rent assistance, and so they approved it and received payments. But now I discover there's this thing where they send you a paper form for a rent certificate where you have to get a physical signature despite being approved. And it's a little bit, to get too deep into the weeds, they send you a physical letter that has no digital record. All other correspondence has a digital record, and there's tasks that you have to complete on the website. This rent certificate form you don't get a digital record that you've received it or that you need to fill it out. And they don't give you warnings that you're going to have your rent assistance taken away. The way you find out is by getting a letter to tell you that it has been taken away. So look, this is the mindset that led to robo-debt. This is exactly what robo-debt is. It's about using paperwork tricks and malicious, it's like if the film Brazil was done on purpose. Like they use tricks to make it so that people who are eligible for money don't receive it. And apparently this rent certificate thing has been going on for years. But this is specifically what the government said they were going to get rid of and improve after the robo-debt Royal Commission. So this is a good example for them to just, this is a paperwork thing. It's not, they could fix it in an afternoon. So anyway, I've reached out to my local MP, Julie Ann at Moreton. My previous MP, Graham Perrott, was notorious for being inattentive. He would post his Wordle streak, which was a perfect Wordle streak, but he wouldn't respond to his constituents. So I'm hoping that Julie Ann is prepared to demonstrate a greater willingness to engage. And there's no reason for this form. I'm not going to complain. This form shouldn't exist because I've already signed a lease form. So this is like a second form. If I was going to lie once, I'd lie twice. So there's no actual reason for this to prove that I'm not lying. But there's no reason for this form not to have a digital record. That's all I'm saying straight up. It should have a digital record. So why doesn't it have a digital record? Maybe a listener could write in and we could talk more. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for your attention to this matter, as Donald Trump says.
Thank you for your attention to this matter.
All right, let's talk to Rav. Okay, we cross now to the festival state, the home of free speech and free ideas, where everyone can say what they think and engage in political discourse. We are talking to this week's guest co-host. He's been a Green City Councillor for the City of Adelaide. He was briefly a federal Green Senator after taking over the vacancy when Penny Wright retired, but since 2021 has been a member of South Australia's Legislative Council. He is currently the party's only Green in the South Australian Parliament. We are hoping to change that in the state election, which is coming up on Saturday, March 21st. Robert Sims, hello, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tom. Thanks very much for having me. Greetings from Adelaide.
Beautiful Adelaide. You were just commenting on this wonderful T-shirt that I have. I got this when I did Adelaide Writers Week in 2023. Whatever I was talking about, there was a lot of controversy. There were some Palestinian writers there, and Louise Adler was out there defending it. Peter Malinowska said, of course, the government shouldn't get involved or exert any pressure on who should appear at Writers Week. It was a very different time.
Yes, how much things have changed, hey? Isn't Louise Adler absolutely amazing? I just thought she was fantastic on 7:30 Report the other night.
Amazing.
I think she's amazing.
She was great. I must say, quite remarkable how much of the conservative media covering this story, and particularly Louise Adler, did happen to leave out the fact that she is herself a Jewish woman, and so accusations of anti-Semitism and her ignorance of the threat of anti-Semitism seems a little bit stretches credulity. But according to the conservative media, it doesn't quite matter when you talk about Louise for some bizarre reason. But look, let's start there. I mean, it's been such a crazy week. We talked a lot last week on last week's episode with Jeff Sparrow. The story was kind of just breaking as we'd started recording. And this past week, it's just got even crazier, of course. Louise Adler resigned from the Adelaide Writers Week. The Adelaide Festival Board resigned, though they seem to be sticking to this decision to not or rescind the invitation to Dr. Randa Abdel-Fattah because of her previous comments that weren't specified and cultural sensitivities. The whole week has now been cancelled in 2026. We had some truly wild comments from the Premier, Peter Malinowskis, comments that have prompted Abdel-Fattah to launch legal action, still TBC on that. Then we got a new board appointed. They completely retracted the decision. They gave an unreserved apology to Randa and an offer for her to appear at Writers' Week next year if she wants to do that, a full apology to Louise Adler, and the announcement that this idea of a subcommittee that was going to review the curatorial decisions of the director is not going to be going ahead. We just found out this morning that Pulp was going to boycott the festival. They're doing a big free concert on the first day of Adelaide Festival. They were asked to delay their announcement, and now they're back on because obviously that whole thing has collapsed and the apology is being given. What have you made of this, if you'll excuse my French, absolute shit show?
Oh, shit show is the word. It's unbelievable. I've actually not seen anything like it. You know, Peter Malinowskis has been in office now for nearly 4 years, and the guy is kind of like Teflon. It takes a lot to see the Premier come under sustained pressure, but he's really copped it this week, and, you know, I think rightly so. It just seems to me to be a totally bizarre situation where, you know, the Premier has clearly exercised political interference. He's thrown his weight around with the board. Now, I mean, his argument is, oh, well, they just asked me my opinion and I offered it. Well, hang on, mate. You know, he's the person who funds the festival.
He's just like you and me, Rob. He's just a guy on the street just like us with
expressing
opinions.
Our views.
Yes.
Exactly. You know, this is the guy that funds the festival. His government appoints the members to the board. And so he's made it really clear, and he's said that he put his concerns in writing. He said, I don't want this person to participate. And the board have just caved into that pressure, which I also think is really concerning in terms of the independence of our arts organisations and our arts institutions.
Yes.
I mean, from the Greens' perspective, we welcome the fact that now finally the new board that's come in has rescinded that decision, and they've made it clear that they're going to invite Dr. Abdel-Fattah to attend next year's writing festival, and they've apologised. Rightly so.
Yep.
Well, we're calling for the Premier to do the same. I mean, he also needs to apologise for his role in this whole mess. But I also think it actually raises some broader questions for me around independence of our arts institutions in South Australia. You know, and that's why we're calling for an independent review. Someone from the arts sector who's got that expertise that can look at everything that's gone on, look at the political interference, but also broader questions around governance and how we ensure this doesn't happen again, because this kind of corporate model doesn't work for arts festivals. And, you know, I had a look at the act that governs the Adelaide Festival during the week. It's pretty baffling to me that it doesn't even have a requirement that it have artists actually on the board. So it's an arts festival, but there's no actual artists that have to be included in the decision making. I think that's just crazy. And so this is something the Greens are really pushing for action on, pushing for an independent review. But Parliament's not going to be sitting until after the election in May. But it's an issue that we certainly intend to take up after the election.
Yeah, so Stephen Page was on there, who is an acclaimed First Nations dancer. He was on there previously, like well before all this stuff went down, I think, but he was the last artist to appear on there.
Yeah.
Look, I understand that, you know, these boards do need people. You don't need to be all artists. A lot of artists terrible at spreadsheets, and there's a whole bunch of corporate bullshit.
So are a lot of politicians, might I say. I'm really crap at that stuff.
Okay, great. So we need a range of skills, but surely, yes, at least some person from the artistic community representing the opinion, because yes, it's very hard to imagine that an artist would not cause a bit of a stink if this kind of decision was made, and make a pretty strong argument for freedom of expression. Yeah.
Yeah, like would the same decision have been made if there were artists actually represented on the board? You know, I would recognise the fact that the people that the government have put on the new board are people with expertise in the arts sector, and I think that's really good. You know, someone like Judy Potter, she's been on the board previously. She's been around for ages. Rob Brookman, a really experienced person in the SA arts scene. So, you know, that's encouraging, but there should be some artists there. And I think we do need to have an independent person cast an eye over what's gone on here. And then the other question too is the government, I think, needs to be ready to offer the financial support that might be needed too, because I'm concerned there are going to be arts workers that are going to be out of pocket as a result of what's happened. I know for a lot of city businesses, they rely on this, not to mention a lot of writers too. So, you know, they really need to make sure that people aren't out of pocket as a result of this fiasco.
Is it at all possible for the week to go ahead? I was a bit surprised that was sort of ruled out pretty definitively even after this massive capitulation and back down. I mean, I know it's been a very turbulent week. I know a lot of people are hurting. I'm sure some plans have been cancelled, et cetera, but I don't know. Do you think it's at all feasible that Writers' Week could go ahead in 2026? Or that's
I don't know. I mean, the new board have said they can't envisage a situation where that's going to be able to happen, which I just think is such a shame because it's a world-renowned event. It brings a lot of tourists to South Australia from interstate, and it's also one of those kind of key events on the intellectual and arts program in South Australia. And one of the things that makes us, I would argue, you know, the best state in the country, best city in Australia, I think Adelaide is.
Whoa,
But it's part of, you know, that arts scene. It's such a big part of who we are as South Australians. So it's a real shame to see it lost. But I think also, though, there is this push for a guerrilla of Writers' Week that's happening, and that seems to be gathering a bit of steam. So I'm really keen to see if there's anything I can do to help get that off the ground.
Yes, the Writers' Festival, RIGHTERS Festival, I believe.
Yes.
I think that's what it's called. I don't know.
Rather than, you know, Mally's Book Club, which was kind of his version of the Writers' Week. It's just bizarre.
So what was actually going on here? Because again, from the outside, as anyone who was aware of the news and looked at what happened to the Bendigo Writers Festival, it is really hard to imagine what the heck they thought was actually going to happen. I mean, obviously, the statement they put out initially, the festival board, clearly indicated the fact they were aware this was going to be controversial and there was going to be some blowback. Surely they didn't predict the level of blowback, the incredible display of solidarity of writers across all different political persuasions who joined the boycott in defense, in protest rather, of this particular decision. But yeah, I mean, have you lent your mind to exactly what was going through the board's head here, how they thought it was going to play out, and what are the forces actually at play that would exert this kind of pressure that would result in this kind of fiasco?
Yeah, well, you know, I think you're right. You wouldn't have to be Nostradamus to see that, you know, if you meddle in this, things are going to go seriously wrong. I think there's a few issues here. I mean, fundamentally, I just don't think the Premier is really plugged into the arts community. I guess for the benefit of people looking at the podcast interstate, you know, our Premier is really interested in sport. That's a big focus for him. And, you know, he's a big focus on Gather Round, for instance, sporting events like the Adelaide 500.
He's got a six-pack. We've all seen the photo. Yada, yada, yada.
He looks very good. I know. He's kind of, I feel like people used to say politics is Hollywood for ugly people. And I feel like Peter Malinowskis has kind of ruined that for every politician. So, yes, he is in good
You're
shape.
also very handsome, Robert. Is that if that's what you're fishing for? Is that what you need? Jesus.
But he's in good shape. He's very interested in sport, but he doesn't have the same interest and passion in the arts. So I think that's like a really big factor here.
Yeah.
And I do also think there's clearly been a lot of lobbying happening on this issue behind the scenes from, powerful interest groups. And, News Limited have been like really the only outlet in the state that have been welcoming this decision and running a really strong editorial line saying that, this was the decision to cancel this author was, somehow some amazing masterstroke on behalf of the Premier. So there's clearly been some powerful forces that have been applying pressure on this issue.
Prior to the Bondi attacks, right? I mean, I think it's what's really come out over the reporting is that Tony Berg, I believe is the gentleman's name, who resigned from the board last year, we now know in protest because he did not like the fact that Louise Adler had programmed Randa Abdel-Fattah and said that I cannot support a festival like this that has a director that programs people with, I believe the quote was, a vendetta against Israel and Zionism. Okay, so the problems predate, and indeed Malinowskis himself has admitted that the problems, concerns about Randa Abdel-Fattah's appearance in the festival predate those horrific attacks in December. But then in this just truly, truly disastrous and amateur statement released by the board, Bondi is both cited as sort of the reason as to why the invitation is being rescinded, but also not, in that we're not saying that Randa's writing are connected to the horrific attacks. Like just such a disgrace, like such a fig leaf to cover what was clearly, yes, as you say, a long-standing campaign to try and get her kicked off.
Yeah, and I thought, Louise Adler, when she was asked about this, she described the board's statement as sort of a word salad.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, it was an outrageous statement to suggest that it seemed to imply that to have someone who is Palestinian speaking at Writers' Week would therefore be disrespectful to people who are, and the whole community is grieving as a result of what's happened in Bondi. I don't see how the two are connected. And to imply that they are, I think, was a really outrageous and offensive statement. And I think it's really unfortunate what we've seen after the Bondi attacks, which I think everybody in the community was really distressed by, and it was horrific. But then we're seeing, some people in the conservative media trying to conflate legitimate critiques of the state of Israel's actions in Gaza with anti-Semitism and hate speech. And I think they're two very different things. People have a right to be able to express their concerns about the actions of a nation state. That's not the same as being anti-Semitic. And I think that nuance is being lost in some of the media reporting after what happened in Bondi.
Yes, and comments from the Premier. I mean, pretty remarkably, in the way he tried to defend this, and people might be familiar with this quote, I just think it's worth laying out to really try and get our heads around this, because I struggled. I thought it was pretty remarkable. In a press conference, Malinowskis says, "Can you imagine if a far-right Zionist walked into a Sydney mosque and murdered 15 people? Can you imagine that as Premier of this state, I would actively support a far-right Zionist going to Writers' Week and speaking hateful rhetoric towards Islamic people? Of course I wouldn't. The reverse is happening in this instance, and I'm not going to support that either." He would later go on to say, "All my remarks and all my comments on the public record have been about coming from a place of compassion and the pursuit of decency towards one another," which I think is quite the claim based on what we just heard with that other quote. But again, the reverse has happened. So in this kind of hypothetical scenario that Malinowskis is laying out there, he's describing the terrorists who committed the Bondi attacks as far left anti-Zionists, and I guess Randa Abdel-Fattah is also one of those, and she's ideologically aligned with the people who committed those attacks. I mean, what do you think of that false equivalence? And for the record, these are the comments that have prompted Dr. Abdel-Fattah to bring a defamation action against him. I mean, what did you make of all that?
Well, they're very offensive comments. I mean, Dr. Abdel-Fattah has made it very clear that she was horrified by the actions in Bondi and rejects all violence. I mean, to me, I was astounded when I actually heard the comment that the Premier made, and it was wider reported here in Adelaide. Yeah, I was astounded. And I just think his judgment on this issue has been really, really poor. And actually, as a South Australian, and I'm someone who, I know Adelaide cops a lot of flack from other states, but I'm someone who actually really genuinely loves South Australia, and I love Adelaide. I've lived here all my life pretty much, and I've had a great time here. And I think there's lots of things about our state that we should be proud of, and one of those is actually our track record as being a leader in social progress and the independence of the arts and that amazing artistic scene that we have. And I think we really punch above our weight. Based on our size, we're only a small state.
Yes, well, you put on fucking 10 festivals at once in 1 month of the year.
Mad March. Yeah. So, but I think what the Premier's done this week is actually really tarnished that whole reputation as well. And I think a lot of South Australians feel really sad and aggrieved. And also, of course, a lot of South Australians feel angry and aggrieved about what's being done to our arts community this week, and also just the politics of the way in which a Palestinian author has been treated as well in this whole debate. And the point that you made before too around the fact that Louise Adler's Jewish background as well has been totally erased in this whole discussion. I just think it's it's been a really sad and unedifying week.
Now, is it over? Because there was a bit of reporting about some other lobbying attempts to try and remove, say, a Palestinian DJ from the Adelaide Festival program. I don't know if you've heard much about that, or whether you think this sort of reversal and this sort of massive capitulation, complete reversal of the decision and offering of the apology to Randa Abdel-Fattah and drawing a line under that, do you think that will delay or slow down or counter off other lobbying efforts to try and cancel Palestinian artists in other parts of the festival?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure. I mean, I certainly support the decision of the artists that have chosen to boycott the festival. I think it's a really brave thing to do, and they've done it because they believe that the actions that have been taken were inconsistent with their values. And I think actually what they've done is preserve some of the integrity of the festival, because they've forced this back down and this about face. So I think, commend them for what they're doing, solidarity with the action they've taken. I think a lot of artists may still be concerned about what's happened and still want to make a statement. And I certainly support them in doing that if that's where people land. But I know, and you mentioned this earlier, Pulp have said, for instance, they now feel comfortable being able to participate. So hopefully we will still see the Adelaide Festival go ahead. There's no suggestion it won't be happening. I think everybody's keen for it to be Adelaide Festival to happen, but there might be some impact on the program as well. And that's why I think it's important the government steps in and, make sure people aren't out of pocket as a result of this.
But sorry, I'm also talking about other campaigns from pro-Israel voices or people who are claiming to act upon the wills of the Jewish community or express concerns about anti-Semitic comments of targeting other artists. So there's a Palestinian DJ in particular who was saying, and there was one of those email campaigns saying, write to the festival and say, remove this person from the festival because of their previous comments about Israel and Gaza. I don't know if you haven't heard much about those ones.
I mean, well, look, I think what's happened actually demonstrates pretty clearly to those that might seek to try and, undermine artistic freedom and exert influence over these decisions. Well, back off. Actually, the arts community have made it very clear that they're not going to, allow these festivals to be turned into something that's just curated by the government of the day. I think that's a pretty clear signal that's been sent. So hopefully people will start to recognise that, okay, people are going to have different views at these events and the like, and we're not going to always agree with everybody that's there, but let's not create this culture where we're going to start seeing, conservative politicians censoring what's happening at our festivals.
Yes, this culture. I mean, I know, and it's a bigger fight that's raging at the moment about freedom of expression. The idea that we have to choose between standing against and condemning anti-Semitism and standing up against Israel's actions in Gaza, or standing against that horrible war and human rights abuses that we're seeing. I view, as messy and horrible and unfortunate as this event has been, as a win for a broader social movement, an expression of solidarity and a defense of pretty basic democratic principles about being able to say what you think, freedom of expression, and, standing up for rights for everybody. That obviously includes standing against anti-Semitism, being horrified at the attacks in Bondi, being horrified at the events of October the 7th, while also pointing out and condemning that what Israel is doing in Gaza is illegal and wrong, and all decent-hearted people and decent-hearted citizens should recognise that and stand against that too.
Exactly. I think you've nailed it, Tom. I think that's right in terms of it's opened up that conversation. And, to that point I made earlier about it, I do think it's really regrettable that after this horrible atrocity that we saw in Bondi, that everybody was distressed by, that we've seen some right-wing politicians trying to whip it up and create division and create this idea that all of those who have been advocating for peace in the Middle East and protesting against the activities or the atrocities being committed by the State of Israel, trying to suggest that that's somehow anti-Semitic. And I just think that's such a nonsense argument, and it doesn't do anything to help social cohesion in our country.
Yes, social cohesion. I mean, Peter Malinowski said, what's really important now is that we're not escalating tensions at the moment. And I think, really good job there, Pete. I think backing in this decision, this incredibly divisive decision of censorship and the clamping down of artistic freedom has in no way escalated tensions or disrupted the unity
not at all.
of the South Australian community.
It's totally lowered the pressure, absolutely, yeah.
All right, let us turn to the upcoming state election. It's happening on Saturday, March the 21st. South Australians are going to take to the polls for the 2026 state election. So it's about 2 months away.
Yeah, March 21.
Heck yeah. Are you excited?
I am actually. Okay. Yeah, very excited.
Great. We'll come to the Greens campaign specifically and our chances and such in a moment, but just sort of setting the table. We've got 47 seats in the lower house. 11 of the 22 seats in the upper house are up for election. That is not you. That's right. You're halfway through your term, so you're not up for election this time around. You're safe?
That's right. I'm safe. I've got an 8-year term, so I'm 4 years in.
Beautiful. A party needs 24 seats for a majority to form government. The Malinowskis Labor government currently has 27 seats. The Libs have just 13. The impression I've got is that things are looking incredibly dire for the Liberal Party. There was a Demos opinion poll in October that had Malinowskis leading the Liberal leader as preferred Premier 58% to 19%. That same poll had Labor on 66% of the two-party preferred vote. Since then, the Libs have changed their leader to Ashton Hearn, who was born in 1991. Now, no shade. I'm all up for young people getting involved in politics, but that's pretty remarkable that she's now leading the party. And she doesn't have a photo on Wikipedia, Rob. Like the Wikipedia entry for the 2026 election is Peter Malinowskis just against a generic image of the Liberal Party logo. So,
really?
I don't know anything about Ashton Hearn, I'll be honest, but would it be fair to say there's not a huge amount of cut through there? And that was kind of like a pretty wild moment of them changing leaders in December when they're facing an election in March.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I was pretty shocked when that happened because I thought they'd left it so late. It was just kind of a week before the Christmas closure. And I think everybody was kind of feeling like, oh, well, Vincent Tarzio is probably going to be the leader they stick with. Yeah. And then suddenly, hey presto, he pulled out, literally on kind of the last week before the summer break, and they've put in Ashton Hearn. I mean, she has a bit of profile because she's been the opposition spokesperson for health. And that obviously was a big issue here in South Australia with the ramping crisis. And that was one of the big issues that led Peter Malinowskis to become Premier because ramping was really out of control under the Liberals and Stephen Marshall. Since Peter Malinowskis and the Labor Party have come in, though they haven't been able to get ramping under control. So that's still an issue.
I remember this from like 4 years ago, but could you just really quickly explain for people what is ambulance ramping? What are we talking about when we talk about that?
Ambulance ramping is when an ambulance rocks up and it's actually just kept on the ramp. It's not, and the person is not able to be brought into the hospital. And therefore, of course, they're being denied care. So the government says the measure should be the length of time that you get for call-outs, and they've been able to improve ambulance response times. But ramping has actually gone up and up and up.
Right.
I guess the difference is between now and 4 years ago is we were in the middle of COVID pandemic. Health was kind of the number one issue for everybody. I'm not sure that health is necessarily the number one issue for people in South Australia this election. I get a lot more feedback around issues to do with housing and cost of living. But I think it was the ramping issue was kind of where Ashton Hearns built her profile. She does have good cut-through. In my opinion, she's a good media communicator. But at the end of the day, the salesperson's one thing for the Liberals, but it's the policies that's the test. And I remember I was in the federal parliament when Malcolm Turnbull took over from Tony Abbott, and there was a lot of excitement about this more moderate leader. And we know what happened there. And I do feel that Ashton Hearn has got maybe a bit of
great, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like Ashton Hearn has kind of got a bit of a dose of the Turnbulls in that, she is more moderate, but it was telling that the first policy announcement she made was that she would scrap the state voice to Parliament, which we legislated for just a few years ago here in South Australia. So I think she's at the behest of the right-wing faction, which are just, I don't think actually in tune with the broader South Australian community, and that's one of the reasons why their votes continue to tank. So I think it's a good opportunity for us in the Greens in terms of being a strong opposition voice and particularly talking about those things and the issues that we've seen today around political interference. We've seen this week around political interference. That's a big concern here in South Australia. Obviously, big issue within the arts this week, but just last week there were allegations made in a parliamentary inquiry that public servants had been told to go slow on investigating the causes of the algal bloom until after the state election. So there's a bit of a narrative, I think, that's building now and concerning the community that, okay, maybe this Premier is exerting a little bit too much influence and also is a bit too concerned about media headlines and media management, and I think
especially now,
exactly.
If that was his concern, it hasn't been a great.
It hasn't played it well, but PR disaster really. But I think it kind of for a lot of people, it also underscores why they want to have Greens there so that we can hold them to account and make sure that we're protecting some of those things that are important. Whether it be independence in the arts sector, independence in the public service, or action on housing, cost of living, climate, algal bloom, all those things.
Yes, I want to get to those in more detail in a moment. But I suppose just, again, sticking with the big picture, it would be fair to say that it's a pretty safe bet that there's going to be something of a pretty comfortable Labor victory in this state election. Is that what you guys are predicting?
I think that's what all the polls are predicting. I do think, though, the shine's come off a bit over the last few weeks for obvious reasons. But I think for us, there's a real opportunity. So, we're looking at wanting to increase our influence in the upper house. We've got our lead candidate is Melanie Selwood. And Melanie has been actually a long-term arts administrator. She's also been a small business owner. She's also worked as a political advisor. She was my chief of staff for 3 years. So we work closely together. And I think she'll be absolutely fantastic. So I'm really excited about having her come in and join the parliament. She's number one on the ticket. And then we've got Katie McCusker, which some of you might know of. She was our candidate for Dunstan and also the candidate for Sturt. And we did really well in Dunstan back in 2024, where we got 20% of the
by-election,
vote.
Right?
In the by-election, so Katie's got a good local following as well, and she works for Barbara Pocock. Katie's great. She's number 2 on the ticket. So I think there's a real chance we have to actually, I feel very confident about 1. I think we've got a really good chance of getting 2 maybe this election. So that's really exciting. And then in the lower house, we've got the seat of Hyson, which we're campaigning strongly in as well, which I think is a seat where we could actually flip that from the Liberals. Last time we got over 20% of the vote and we didn't even target the seat. This time we're throwing everything at it. We've got a fantastic candidate, Genevieve Dawson-Scott. She's a local community person, really highly regarded. She's already blitzed the place with core flutes, and we're getting lots and lots of positive feedback. So I think that's a seat that could turn to the Greens as well. I feel really excited about that opportunity.
Have the Greens won in the lower house previously in South Australia?
We have never broken into.
Haven't broken in. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, never broken into the lower house before. And so this is a real chance for us to be able to do that. And I think this is the best chance we've ever had of winning 2 in the Legislative Council. And if the polls are anything to go by, they're putting us between 13 or 14%. Well, if we can get that, if we can replicate what we got in last year's federal election in South Australia, we'll get 2. We'll get both Melanie and Katie, and probably the sole balance of power in the upper house, which would be, fantastic.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, yeah, that would be huge. Again, just sort of coming back a little bit, I mean, how would you sum up Malinowska's first term? You touched a bit on the sort of challenges in regards to addressing the health issue. Obviously, in recent days, the shine has come off, as you said, this guy who is massively popular, it seemed, and I think it'd be fair to say has occasionally shown some political courage and done some progressive things. But how would you sum up the past 4 years?
Yeah, look, I think it's been interesting for us from a Greens perspective. I think overall you'd have to say that the Malinowskis government has been competent, and they have done some good things and some courageous things, often in collaboration and partnership with the Greens. And I feel really proud of the work.
Nice, good pivot.
Yeah.
Good disclaimer there. Yeah.
But I know that a politician would say that, but genuinely, Tom, I feel really proud of the stuff we've been able to do, because they're things that actually we wouldn't have been able to see happen in the Parliament if the Greens weren't there. So the voice to Parliament, the Liberals opposed that, having a state voice to Parliament. The Greens were able to work with the government and, make that happen. And we've got that operating, and I think that's been a really good thing for our state. We've been campaigning for years around ending no-cause evictions in South Australia, making it easier to rent with pets. Well, again, the Liberals were not on board. It was the Greens that were able to work with the government, negotiate that and make that happen. And we've also got through a whole heap of private members' bills as well, things like, protecting key public assets from privatisation without approval of both houses of Parliament, protection for heritage buildings. We ran a huge campaign around saving the Crown and Anchor, and, the government actually folded and legislated to protect that. So I think we've been able to do a lot with this government. And from my perspective, I think if they're returned, and I think that's highly likely, we'll push them to go further and faster on the things that we care about. And, the big area for me that I think has been missing, and where Labor have really bungled this term in terms of my impression overall, is housing. They just haven't been able to take the action that's needed on housing. They've done nothing on rent prices, which have just been skyrocketing out of control. And, Adelaide's now regarded as being less affordable than Melbourne and Sydney. I mean, which I just think is insane.
Oh, wow.
Like some of the housing data for rentals has us as being less affordable than some of those bigger states, which is just shocking. And so, we've got to do something about that. And Labor have just been totally missing in action on the issue of rent prices. And then, of course, just not building the housing that we need. And they're key things that we're campaigning on.
Great. And again, I want to ask you a little bit more about that in a moment. Just before we move on from other parties, I have to ask about Sarah Game. Okay, I find Sarah Game to be a fascinating person. She was elected with One Nation in 2022. She leaves in May 2025. The impression I get is because they're too racist or a bit too anti-immigration for her tastes. She had been smeared as having Greens values at one point, I think, because she wanted sustainable and cohesive immigration. And of course, that's far too lefty for One Nation. So she leaves in last year. She becomes an independent. Then she sets up her own party, Sarah Game, Fair Go for South Australians Party. Then she gets kicked out of her own party because she didn't pay her membership fees to be a member of the party. And what seems to be some kind of coup is basically kicked out of the party and written out as a founding member of the Sarah Game Fair Go for Australians Party. Is that a fair summary of the Sarah Game saga?
We couldn't make it up. It'd be a great book for Writers' Week next year, I reckon.
Love it. All right. And so is she running? Oh, no, she's not up for... she's halfway through a term as well. Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah,
so she's got another 4 years.
I'm trying to think of what I can say about Sarah Game.
Yep.
Yeah, she's a really interesting person in that when she first got elected, and I was, to be honest with you, gutted when I saw One Nation have finally broken into the upper house, because we've always been campaigning against, keeping One Nation out of the parliament here in South Australia, and we've never had a One Nation person, and so it was really disappointing when One Nation broke through. And then when Sarah Game started, I think a lot of people thought, oh, okay, she's kind of making statements that don't sound like One Nation. And so I think a lot of us thought that there might be a world in which she moves away from the One Nation party.
It was a little bit like, have you read the stuff that your party is about? It's like you're saying all this stuff, but you're in, like, are you familiar with what One Nation is kind of going for here?
But then she's moved from One Nation, but then gone into sort of really far right politics in terms of trying to restrict access to women's reproductive rights, pushing to regulate restrict late-term abortions, been doing a lot of that sort of style of politics, sort of really right-wing kind of culture politics stuff. So, unfortunately, she's moved out of One Nation, but she hasn't moved more to the centre or anything like that. Her politics are still, right-wing, and but she'll still be in the parliament next term, but I don't think there'll be another person from this Fair Go party joining her, that's for sure.
Well, I guess not with her endorsement now that she's been kicked out anyway. But
it's bizarre, isn't it? Like, I can't believe it. I think didn't the same thing, wasn't something strange like that happened with the One Nation party itself years ago too, where Pauline Hanson got ousted from One Nation or something for a while?
And then she's taken her name off the party too, and then there's financial scandals.
I think the hard ride of politics, there's some pretty weird stuff that happens there.
Thankfully, nothing weird happens in the Greens. We're normal. We're normal. All right, so looking at the upper house, so of the 11 seats that are up for election, you got 4 Labor, 4 Libs, 2 SA Best, that's Nick Xenophon's sort of outfit these days, and 1 Independent. They're of all the 11 that are up for it. As you mentioned, you reckon we've got a pretty good chance. So that 1 Independent is Tammy Franks, who quit the Greens in May of last year. And maybe, again, for folks who are outside of South Australia and maybe not in the SA Greens party, with the caveat that I know it could be difficult. There's some stuff you probably can't talk about. Maybe there's some still legal stuff going on. I don't know. But can you give us a basic summary of exactly what happened there, why Tammy's no longer in the Greens?
Yeah, sure. I guess first I should probably clarify, we actually have 2 independents in the upper house at the moment. So one of the SA Best people quit, Frank Pangello. He's not an independent anymore. He's now joined the Liberals. So there's only one SA Best person there, and they're standing for election this time. So, but notionally there's 2 of those spots that are up.
Gotcha.
In terms of Tammy, I mean, it's kind of, it feels like ancient history now. It happened, all this sort of blew up early last year.
Everyone was talking about Sarah Game quitting One Nation. That was where the focus in the same month. It was all
chaos. That's right. Yeah, I guess so. What happened was Tammy. There was a process that the party adopted, and Tammy was found to have engaged in misconduct. That was the finding of the party's processes, and she was unhappy with that and disputed that finding, and she resigned from the Greens and decided to sit as an independent. So that's basically what happened.
Sure. And we're not getting into it. I broke my rule at the time. I mentioned it and I was like, oh, that seems a shame. Everything I've seen of Tammy Franks, she seems like a decent person who's done some good stuff. Then some people contacted the show being like, you don't know what's going on here. And I'm like, you know what? You're absolutely right. I don't know the internal machinations here. Not my circus, not my monkeys. Still, broadly speaking, I hope we can agree it's a shame that, that any sitting Greens MP leaves the party because of whatever process.
Absolutely.
You got to avoid that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a real shame, and particularly when somebody's been, elected on the Greens platform, and in Tammy's case, she'd been with the party for 15 years in the upper house. So that was a shame. And you're right that she's done good work, particularly in areas of like LGBTI law reform, sex work reform. Like they're all things that Tammy has done a lot of work on, and that I want to continue to work on as well in the parliament. The Green team is committed to continuing to campaign and focus on. So it was a really regrettable outcome to lose a sitting MP from the party. And I think if someone quits a political party, they should stand down and give then the political party an opportunity to fill that vacancy with someone. And I think that should have happened in this instance. But look, we are where we are. And
is she running again as an independent?
I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, okay, right. That's still a bit TBC. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. But we're focused on, and you think that the party has a decent chance of getting 2 more upper house seats on those 1 and 2 tickets in the upper house. Is that right?
Yeah, I absolutely do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that we've got a really good chance because, the Xenophon team really is no longer a presence here in South Australia. I think a lot of South Australians are concerned about the excesses of the malanalysis government and the fact that, I mentioned before that this government's done a few good things, but at the same time, there's a general recognition, I think, that we can do better, particularly on housing, cost of living, the environment, public transport, all these sorts of areas that have been neglected. And I think people would like to see Greens being in the parliament so that we could push the government to go further and faster and do some good stuff.
Cool. Let's just quickly hit some policy points. You mentioned housing, of course. So is this really the number one issue that the Greens are running on first and foremost? Is that sort of the big focus? And if so, what are the specific policy proposals you're running on?
Yeah, it's a huge focus for us this election. So we want to get rent prices under control. We're campaigning for rent capping. So introducing rent controls so that rent prices can only increase in line with inflation. And, I've tried to legislate to do that a few times during this term of Parliament. We're going to continue pushing on that. We also want to establish a commissioner for residential tenancies, which I think you have in Victoria, like Commissioner for Renters. We don't even have a tenants advocacy body here in South Australia. So we want to see a funded commissioner, and that's something we'll keep pushing for too. We'd also like to see transferable bonds so that people can, move easily between properties and go through that process. So there's some of the key things in the rental space, and minimum energy efficiency standards for rentals so that, a landlord actually has to provide an air conditioning system that works, and basic things
doesn't
like
get
fly
that hot in
screens.
Adelaide, does it?
Yeah.
Oh no, wait, it gets fucking steamy.
Yeah, 40 degrees. but also like the sort of basic things like fly screens that work and stuff like that too. So there's some of the things in the rental space. And the housing space, we're campaigning to build 20,000 public homes and to establish a public builder which can clear the maintenance backlog of our existing public housing, but also actually get the housing online that we need. The government during this term renamed Housing SA to the Housing Trust. So they brought back the Housing Trust concept, which we had that was established in the 50s, but they only re-established the name. They didn't restore the mission of the Housing Trust, which is for it to actually be a public builder. So we want to actually see resources being put into that. So that's fundamental for us. I guess the other thing that we're campaigning on in terms of cost of living as well is electricity. The Liberals, when they were in power in the 90s, sold off ETSA, which was the publicly owned electricity provider here in South Australia. Sold it off. As a result, all those profits now go offshore, and we have really high electricity prices here in South Australia. So we'd like to see a commission of inquiry into bringing back public ownership of our electricity and ensuring that there's publicly owned renewable electricity here in South Australia. So that's a big one in cost of living. Yeah. And then 50-cent public transport fares as well. We've been campaigning on that. Interestingly, the Liberals have come on board and matched our policy on that, which is pretty wild. So we've got a situation where the Liberals and the Greens are campaigning for 50-cent fares. The only ones who don't support it are the Labor government.
Really? But haven't they seen, obviously the Liberals have seen the Queensland example of how crazy popular that was. The Liberals couldn't campaign against that when they wanted to win. Now they have it as massively popular. Surely, yeah. And the Labor sort of did, I think, claw back some of their vote with some sort of more progressive reforms like that, although obviously were defeated in the end at the state election. But what, Malinowskis doesn't want to do that? What's the argument, such as it is, too expensive?
Well,
they don't deserve it.
No, their argument's a bit more unique than that, Tom. Their argument is that if you don't charge for something, people don't value it.
What? Are you serious? Are you actually serious?
Yeah, that's actually what they've said. That was the position that was put by the Transport Minister at the time, Tom Coutts-Antonis. He said, if you don't charge for something, people just don't value it. I don't really get that logic. But
as in the way they treat public transport, or they won't use public transport because it costs less? What the hell are they talking about?
That the Labor government values it so much that they think people should pay through the nose to use it. That's the way that they demonstrate how much they value it. They don't fund in actually extending the network or improving the service.
I really like that. That's great.
Yeah.
No, this is actually good for you morally. Like if you want to, You've got to recognise the value of your precious.
Yeah,
public
well,
transport
show us
system.
that you value it. Pay for it. And, we pay actually the highest public transport fares in the country at the moment, apparently. So,
really?
We really value it in South Australia,
Well,
according to the
indeed.
government.
Oh, my Lord. And again, I always like to ask, what are the arguments against capping rents to inflation that will, I assume, discourage investors and destroy the rental market and reduce the precious supply?
Yes, these are the arguments that have been put. So, every time I talk about rent capping, that's what people say. And I often get landlords that will ring up if I'm on Talkback Radio and say, if you do this, I'm going to sell my investment property. I warn you, I'm going to sell my investment property. And I often say, well, if you sell your property, it's not like, we send in a bulldozer and it's taken off the housing market. If you sell the property, someone else can buy it. And if lots of investors sell their homes, then that means that there'll be more houses available, and actually that will reduce the price for people that want to buy a house to live in, not necessarily.
Shut up, communist.
Yeah, I know. They don't call me Red Rob for nothing, Tom.
Watermelon Rob. And finally, and look, I'll be really honest here, I'm really ignorant when it comes to the algal bloom issue. I know it's a massive issue. I know the Greens have been fighting the good fight. Sarah Hanson-Young mentioned it briefly a few weeks last year when she was on the show. I really recognise it's a very big deal. I just have not put into my brain the details of it. And maybe, again, for people outside the state who are in a similar position, would you mind summarising exactly what is this harmful algal bloom crisis and what has been the political response to it and what are the Greens fighting for? Yeah,
sure. And look, Sarah's done a lot of work on this at the national level as well. So we've been working closely together, trying to really shine a light on what's going on. It first kind of came to light back in March when surfers were kind of reporting they were going to the beach and they were feeling like they were getting like dry throat and itchy eyes and stuff like that. And we were also seeing things like kangaroos and stuff being impacted. At that time, we had no idea what was sort of going on. It was just sort of sounded like some anecdotal evidence that maybe there was some sort of strange event happening near the water. And then it became clear that there was this algal bloom that was taking hold. There was algae that was present. But at that stage, it was kind of in more coastal communities. It wasn't in metropolitan Adelaide. And so I think whilst people were concerned about it, it hadn't really reached the state's consciousness. And then I think it was around May, June that it started appearing in metro beaches as well. And that's when people started to get really shocked because the stuff that we were seeing, it was like something out of a science fiction novel. Like, I don't know if you've seen some of the footage of what was happening at the sea, but the water was sort of changing colour. There was this foam. So it was looking quite unusual, but also you're actually seeing, dead fish and sea life washing up. And it's been devastating, like to see our beaches looking like graveyards and walking through there and seeing, large fish, seeing even penguins, whole range of different sea animals and marine animals that have been impacted. It's just been really devastating. And I think really brought home to a lot of South Australians the importance of caring for our environment and being concerned about our environment and making sure that we're focusing on research and remediation. And of course, also the consequences of climate change. I mean, scientists have been warning about this for 30 years. And I'm the chair of the State Parliamentary Inquiry into the algal bloom. And we've had evidence from scientists that they've said, we've been talking about this for years and years and years. And we've said to governments that we were going to see a bloom like this take hold. And now it's finally happened. So it's
from increasing ocean's temperatures is the kind of thing that gives rise to these conditions to create the algae.
Yeah, that's right. So that's we're still not clear on exactly what the full suite of causes are. Obviously, climate change has been a major factor here because it's been warming the temperature in the water, and we had a very hot summer, the one before last, and it was pretty still. And so, that's played a role. There's also talk that the nutrient runoff from some of the floods might also have had an impact, along with broader pollution too in the water. And so it's just kind of created this cocktail and these conditions where this algae has been able to take hold. The type of algae that we have in South Australia is actually never been detected in Australia before, which is, also really concerning. And overseas, places like Miami have been dealing with these blooms, and they've lasted for years and years.
Oh, wow.
And, worst case scenario, it could be with us for a decade or more. That's the worst case scenario. And it might ebb and flow with different temperatures and weather.
And so when you say there's rumours that the Malinowskis government is like, hey, go slow on the causes of the algal bloom, what sort of things would they be worried about coming out that could have political ramifications, do you think?
Yeah, so I should say the government were really clear that they don't support that. They've said that they have given clear directions to do everything they can to get the bloom under control. And I, as chair of the committee, actually brought in all of the heads of department, and they all rejected that they were ever given that directive.
Okay.
I think it's possible, though, that there could have been a culture created in the public service where people thought that the government doesn't want to get bad news.
Yeah.
I think that's possible. So, it's probably unlikely that clearly there was no formal directive given because all of the heads of department have made that clear. So, take that at face value. But it is possible that a culture could have been created where people felt like they don't want to rock the boat, ahead of the election.
I guess yes, I mean, bad news is one thing, but I guess it's not like something specific done by the South Australian government would necessarily be resulting in this kind of algal bloom, right? This is a broader climate crisis phenomenon. Is that fair to say?
I think that's right, except, however, at the same time, they were very slow to act.
Right, and what do we do about it, right?
And there were gaps in the testing as well of our water over key periods too. And we had evidence at the inquiry that, for instance, one of the people that does some of the water testing was on annual leave. And so the water testing didn't happen at that time. There clearly wasn't the resources being made available to prioritise that. So, I think there was a lot of concern here in South Australia that the federal government and the state government were both just too slow to act. Now, to be fair, we haven't ever experienced anything like this in Australia. So there probably wasn't much awareness of the issue, but at the same time, they didn't really take it seriously.
Yeah. Well, this is why I think we should charge for beaches. At the moment you can go to the beach for free, and we don't value our beaches enough.
We don't
and that's
value
how you
our
get
beaches.
algal blooms. Yeah.
Let's start charging for. That's right. Absolutely.
God. All right, Robert, we're going to wrap up there. Thank you so much for your time. I suppose just one last question, would be, I'm interested in sort of campaigning when you're out there, and I'll ask you to let people know how they can get involved in the SA campaign if they ever want to. But, I mean, looking at the 2025 state election, the federal election rather, yes, there was a slight swing to the party in the Senate at a level, and you said if that sort of same swing is recreated, we could be looking pretty good for those two extra seats, which would be cool. But I mean, Katie McCusker was the candidate for Sturt. Sturt was a bit of a target seat. I think it was fair to say there was a lot of talking up of the chances of the Greens in the federal seat of Sturt, and that did not eventuate. There was a small swing against Katie as the candidate there. There was an independent, Verity Cooper, who came through, which I assume is responsible for some of that, I guess. So, I guess I'm just interested. How are the Greens sort of cutting through campaigning, reflecting on the 2025 results, and how that feeds into your approach to the state campaign here?
Yeah, I think one of the key differences in terms of, say, Sturt and Hyson, and, the party ran a colossal effort in Sturt, but we were damaged by the fact that there was an independent that came in and ran a strong campaign, and that really ate into our primary vote. Well, that's not happening in Hyson. The Greens really are the only alternative contender there between Labor and the Liberals. So that's an important factor. And also, we've actually, in the long term, performed really strongly in Hyson. So it's a seat where we've actually polled really, really strongly over a long period of time. And we've had, figures in the 20s over many years. I think what really surprised us this time round was that we only need to get 1,000 votes to get ahead of the Labor candidate, and then with Labor preferences, leapfrog over the Liberals and take the seat. So it's a pretty small electorate. 1,000 votes isn't a huge ask in that sense. It's big geographical, but, state seats are smaller than federal seats in terms of the number of votes you've got to split. So I think it's absolutely achievable for us. I think some of the political conditions are different in Hyson to what we saw in Sturt last time round.
Nice. Cool. Well, if you want to be involved in changing those political conditions even further and fight for a more progressive South Australia, what can people do if they're listening to this podcast? If they're in South Australia, if they're outside of South Australia, what can they do to help you out ahead of the election on March 21?
Best thing they can do is contact our Greens at state office and sign up. We know when the election is. It's going to be on March 21. So if they want to come over and help out on election day and staff polling booths, that is always really, really helpful. But we can also always do with help in terms of door knocking and stuff like that in the lead up to the election as well. So yeah, do give our Greens office a call. Do you want me to get their number? I don't have it in front of me, but I can pull it up for you.
Yeah, we can pop that in the show notes and the contact information if people want to do that. Just check out the show notes for the show and hit up the good comrades at the South Australian Greens. Thank you, Robert Sims. Good luck. We're thinking of you. I'll see you. I'm in town for the first week of March for the Adelaide Fringe performing my show, but it's not about me. But I might see you there.
I might have to go along.
Yes, you bloody well have to. Thanks for talking to me. I appreciate it, Rob. Take it easy.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate the opportunity.